Imagine an entire civilization, thousands of people, vanishing from massive stone cities carved into cliffs, leaving behind no written records, no clear reason, and no trace of where they went. The Anasazi, or the Ancient Puebloans, built one of North America's most sophisticated prehistoric cultures. But around 1300 AD, they were gone. What could cause an entire civilization to disappear without a trace? Tonight, we dive deep into one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries, the disappearance of the Anasazi. In the heart of the American Southwest, among the sun-scorched mesas and winding canyons, lie the silent remains of a once great civilization. Towering stone dwellings cling to the cliffs of Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon, whispering secrets of a people who simply vanished. They're known to history as the Anasazi, or as they called themselves, the Ancient Puebloans, master architects, astronomers, and farmers who defied the desert. For centuries, they thrived, building vast cities, mapping the stars, and creating spiritual monuments aligned with the sun and moon. But sometime around the year 1300 AD, something extraordinary and terrifying happened. Entire villages were abandoned. Fires were left unburned. Tools, pottery, and sacred objects were simply left behind. No records, no bodies, no clear explanation. In the heart of the American Southwest, beneath the blazing sun and surrounded by towering red cliffs, lies a mystery that has haunted historians, archaeologists, and storytellers for centuries. These lands, stretching across modern-day Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, were once home to one of North America's most remarkable ancient civilizations, the Anasazi, also known as the Ancient Puebloans. But somewhere between 1200 and 1300 AD, this powerful, intelligent, and deeply spiritual culture simply vanished. No one knows why. No one knows where they went. What remains are silent ruins, colossal stone dwellings clinging to cliffs, underground ceremonial chambers, and scattered pottery fragments that whisper stories of a lost people. How does a civilization that mastered the desert, built astronomical cities, and thrived for centuries disappear without leaving a trace? This isn't just a story about ruins and relics. It's about a people who defied the impossible. The Anasazi carved homes directly into canyon walls hundreds of feet high, constructed roads connecting distant settlements, and created ceremonial centers that perfectly aligned with the movements of the stars. These weren't primitive wanderers. These were planners, thinkers, engineers, people whose knowledge of astronomy and agriculture rivaled even that of ancient civilizations across the ocean. Yet today, we know them mostly through what they left behind: stone walls, sacred carvings, and the mystery of their sudden disappearance. It's almost as if they vanished overnight, leaving meals half-eaten, tools lying in the dust, and sacred sites abandoned. Was it drought, war, famine, a rebellion against religious leaders? Or could something stranger be at play, something written in the stars or whispered through ancient legends? Over the next moments, we'll step into the world they built, a world of breathtaking architecture, cosmic alignments, and spiritual devotion, to uncover what could have led to one of the most dramatic disappearances in history. But before we try to solve the mystery, let's imagine what life looked like when the Anasazi ruled these lands. Picture vast stone villages nestled high above the desert floor, hundreds of interconnected rooms carved into cliffsides, each one housing families who farmed the land below. Picture ceremonial plazas alive with music, chanting, and the rhythmic sound of drums echoing through the canyon walls at sunset. They were masters of adaptation, people who turned dry, unforgiving deserts into flourishing farmlands. They understood the cycles of rain, the paths of the sun, and the importance of balance between the physical and the spiritual. Their lives were guided by the heavens, their structures built in harmony with celestial movements. To the Anasazi, the sky wasn't just above them, it was part of who they were. Yet for all their brilliance, their story took a mysterious turn. One day, the homes that once echoed with laughter and ritual songs fell silent. Generations of knowledge, gone. Their sacred places, left behind as if frozen in time. It was as if the desert reclaimed its people, swallowing them whole. The first explorers who stumbled upon their ruins in the 1800s were stunned. They found entire cliff cities, complex, multi-storied structures carved into the rock face, still standing strong centuries later. They called them the Ancient Ones, or Anasazi, a Navajo term meaning ancient enemies or ancient outsiders. To the modern Pueblo peoples, the descendants of these ancient builders, they were not enemies at all, but ancestors. Their stories speak not of disappearance, but of migration, transformation, and survival. Still, archaeologists can't explain why such massive settlements were abandoned so suddenly. There are no signs of a final battle, no mass graves, no widespread disease. It's as if they saw something coming and left, but where is it left where, and why so abruptly? As we begin this journey into the mystery, we face the same haunting question that has puzzled researchers for over 700 years. What could make an entire civilization, one of the most advanced of its time in North America, abandon everything they built and disappear into the desert shadows? To uncover the truth, we must go back in time, before the disappearance, before the droughts, before the silence, to when the Anasazi civilization stood at its height. A world of order, complexity, and faith. A world that thrived against all odds, surrounded by unforgiving landscapes yet united by shared purpose and vision. Because understanding how they lived might just be the key to understanding why they vanished. To understand the mystery of their disappearance, we first need to understand how extraordinary their rise truly was. The story of the Anasazi civilization begins thousands of years before they built their magnificent cliff cities, long before stone towers rose from the desert floor and long before the echoes of drums filled the canyons of the southwest. Their journey started around 1500 BCE, when small bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers began to settle in the rugged lands we now call the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. These early people, ancestors of the Anasazi, learned to survive in one of the harshest environments in North America. There were no mighty rivers like the Nile or the Tigris here, only dry plateaus, steep mesas, and unpredictable rain. Yet somehow they found a way to thrive. They began to cultivate the land, planting corn, beans, and squash crops that would become the foundation of their civilization. Over centuries, their relationship with the land grew stronger. They built small pit houses, dug partially into the ground to protect from the heat of summer and the freezing winds of winter. Each generation brought innovation. Each community learned to adapt, to harvest water from the scarce rainfall, to store food for lean years, and to build alliances with neighboring tribes. By around 750 AD, the Anasazi had transformed from scattered farming families into a network of interconnected villages. They built with stone and adobe, stacking homes in clusters and constructing kivas, circular underground chambers for meetings, ceremonies, and spiritual practices. These were not simple shelters anymore. They were the beginnings of organized society, communities united by shared beliefs, rituals, and goals. And then something remarkable happened. Around 900 AD, their culture exploded into a golden age of architecture, art, and astronomy. They built some of the most astonishing structures in pre-Columbian North America. Monumental settlements like Chaco Canyon in New Mexico and Mesa Verde in Colorado. Chaco Canyon wasn't just a village. It was a city, a vast ceremonial and trade center that became the heart of Anasazi civilization. Towering great houses such as Pueblo Bonito, built with millions of hand-shaped sandstone blocks, rose from the desert floor. Some of these buildings were 4 to 5 stories tall, containing hundreds of rooms, storage chambers, and ritual spaces. Their walls aligned with the cardinal directions, their windows and doorways perfectly positioned to mark the solstices and equinoxes. This was a society guided by the stars. The Anasazi were master astronomers who built observatories and tracked the movement of the sun, moon, and planets. They carved spirals into stone that caught the sunlight in precise patterns, marking the seasons, not just for farming, but for spiritual ceremonies that tied their people to the cosmos. Trade routes stretched for hundreds of miles across the continent, linking the Anasazi to distant cultures. They traded turquoise, feathers, shells, and precious stones, goods that traveled from the Pacific coast, from Mexico, and beyond. These were not isolated desert dwellers. They were part of a thriving network of commerce and communication. Their society was built on balance, between nature and people, between the physical and the spiritual. Every structure, every artifact, every piece of pottery reflected harmony with their surroundings. They respected the land because they depended on it, and in return the land seemed to bless them. As centuries passed, their architectural achievements reached new heights. By the late 1100s, they began constructing cliff dwellings, entire villages built into the faces of canyon walls. These were not only fortresses of stone, but masterpieces of design. Perched high above the valleys, they offered safety, community, and connection to the sacred world around them. Some dwellings, like Cliff Palace in Mesa Verde, housed over 100 people and contained elaborate kivas and multi-room homes, stacked like honeycombs into the rock. Imagine what it took to build these carving and carrying stones up sheer cliffs, designing passageways and constructing roofs from wooden beams brought from miles away. Every log, every brick, every design had a purpose. It was a civilization in perfect synchronization with its environment, a people whose hands, minds, and hearts worked together toward survival and spiritual harmony. But the Anasazi were more than architects. They were thinkers, dreamers, and believers. Their art, painted on rock walls and pottery, tells stories of migration, of the sun and moon, of connections between the living and the ancestors. Every pattern carried meaning, spirals for the cycle of life, handprints for presence, animals for spirit guides. Their world was woven with myth and meaning, where every sunrise was sacred and every shadow had purpose. By the 12th century, their civilization had reached its zenith. From Chaco to Mesa Verde, from Cayenta to Canyon de Chelly, the land was alive with their presence. The sound of children playing in the plazas, the smell of roasted corn drifting through the air, the rhythmic beat of drums echoing from cliff to cliff. It was a time of abundance, community, and deep spiritual energy. Generations had built something extraordinary here, a culture that had mastered the art of living with the land, not against it. A society that had risen from the dust and shaped stone and time itself into harmony. They had survived the heat, the droughts, the isolation, and they had turned it all into beauty. The Anasazi were at the peak of their power, their knowledge, and their unity. Their world stretched across hundreds of miles of desert and canyon, their great houses shining in the sun like ancient temples of stone and silence. Their lives were connected to the rhythm of the earth, to the rains that fed their crops, the stars that guided their ceremonies, and the spirits that whispered in the wind across the mesa tops. The ruins of the Anasazi stand today as silent witnesses to a civilization that once thrived against all odds. Scattered across the vast expanse of the American Southwest, these remnants tell a story, not through written words, but through stone, pottery, and the land itself. Every wall, every carving, every shard of pottery holds a clue, whispering fragments of a lost chapter in human history. To understand the mystery of their disappearance, we must first listen to what these clues are trying to say. When explorers and archaeologists first stumbled upon the ruins in the 1800s, they were awestruck. Towering multi-story dwellings built into cliffsides, some with more than 100 rooms, rose before them, structures that seemed impossibly advanced for their time. These weren't crude shelters thrown together by wandering tribes. They were engineered with precision, symmetry, and purpose. The walls were made of sandstone bricks, so perfectly stacked that even centuries of wind and rain couldn't tear them down. Inside, they found evidence of daily life frozen in time: stone tools, grinding stones, corn stored in sealed clay jars, woven sandals, and intricate pottery painted with mesmerizing black and white designs. Each piece of pottery, unique in its patterns and symbols, told a story. Some carried spirals representing the sun's path. Others depicted animals, storms, and geometric shapes that scholars believe held spiritual meaning. Pottery wasn't just art, it was a reflection of their identity, their beliefs, and their connection to the cosmos. And then there were the roads. Straight, engineered paths stretching for miles across deserts, and canyons, some up to 30 feet wide, connecting distant settlements like veins across the land. They led from Chaco Canyon to outlying villages and sacred sites, cutting perfectly straight through the terrain, over hills and through valleys, ignoring the obstacles of nature. These weren't trade routes in the usual sense. They were ceremonial highways, guiding pilgrims, traders, and spiritual leaders from one sacred center to another. At the heart of these networks stood Chaco Canyon, a place unlike any other in North America. Its great houses, like Pueblo Bonito, weren't merely homes, they were cosmic instruments. Their doorways, windows, and walls aligned with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. The Anasazi didn't just build for shelter. They built to synchronize their lives with the heavens. In one chamber, a spiral petroglyph still captures sunlight in a beam that shifts with the seasons, marking the exact moments of summer and winter solstice, proof that the builders understood astronomical precision. They built kivas, circular underground chambers, as spiritual centers. These spaces were where community members gathered for rituals, discussions, and ceremonies meant to connect with the spirit world. The ceilings of kivas were supported by wooden beams, many of which still survive today, allowing scientists to use tree ring dating, known as dendrochronology, to track patterns of climate and drought across centuries. Each ring tells a story of years of plenty or hardship, a coded message from nature itself. One of the most haunting clues lies in the way they built their homes, carved deep into the cliffs, hidden and protected. Why build cities so hard to reach, so precariously balanced above the desert floor? Some researchers believe it was for protection, perhaps from enemies or maybe from something even more mysterious. Others suggest it was spiritual, the cliffs bringing them closer to the heavens, to their gods and ancestors. Whatever the reason, the cliff dwellings stand as breathtaking monuments of both ingenuity and devotion. Archaeologists have also discovered massive storage rooms, filled with corn and grains, suggesting not just survival but abundance. These people knew how to harness their environment, using intricate irrigation systems to draw water from the scarce rainfall and divert it toward their crops. They mastered the balance between human need and nature's limits. But even in their prosperity, there are hints of tension, walls rebuilt over older ones, burned layers beneath the soil, and settlements suddenly abandoned. And then there are the rock carvings, petroglyphs etched into canyon walls that still defy easy explanation. Spirals, stars, figures with elongated bodies, and mysterious shapes that seem to represent celestial or spiritual phenomena. Some show alignments that correspond with solar eclipses or supernovas visible in ancient skies. In Chaco Canyon, a famous carving believed to depict a supernova from 1054 AD, the same event recorded by astronomers in China, suggests that the Anasazi were not only observing the sky, but interpreting cosmic events as messages from beyond. These carvings, scattered across thousands of miles, act as a visual language, an unspoken record of their world, a world where nature, spirit, and science were one. Every mark on the stone was deliberate. Every line carried meaning. The Anasazi didn't write with ink or paper. They wrote with light and shadow, stone and time. But not all clues come from stone. The landscape itself speaks. Layers of ash, shifts in tree rings, and traces of ancient pollen reveal cycles of drought, floods, and shifting climates that would have tested even the most resilient society. Yet for centuries, they endured. This is what makes their disappearance so perplexing. These were not people easily broken by hardship. They had faced environmental challenges before and adapted, so what changed? Still, in the fragments of pottery, in the footprints carved into sandstone, in the alignment of doorways to the rising sun, there is a sense of intentionality, of purpose. These clues show us a civilization that was not primitive, not chaotic, but deeply ordered. They were connected to one another, to the land, to the stars. Archaeologists have pieced together much from these remnants, yet the story remains incomplete. The more we learn, the more questions arise. The clues in the desert are everywhere, in the stones that refuse to crumble, in the silence of the canyons, in the way the wind moves through the ruins, as if still carrying voices from the past. The Anasazi may be gone, but their presence lingers, etched into the bones of the desert, waiting for us to listen. For centuries, the Anasazi flourished in harmony with their land. They built vast stone cities, farmed the desert, and watched the skies to guide their lives. But then, around the late 1200s, everything changed. One by one, their settlements were abandoned. The fires in their hearths went cold. Their great cities fell silent. And within just a few generations, the Anasazi, a civilization that had thrived for over 1,000 years, were gone. What makes their disappearance so haunting is not just that they vanished, but how they vanished. There are no written records, no final message left behind. Their cities, places like Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, and Hub and Weep, were left eerily intact, as if the people simply walked away. Archaeologists discovered half-finished tools, sealed storage jars full of corn, and even footprints frozen in the dust. It's as if life stopped mid-sentence, and no one ever came back to finish the story. Narrator, imagine walking through Mesa Verde today. You step inside the Cliff Palace, an enormous dwelling carved into stone, rooms perfectly preserved even after 700 years. You look around and everything feels as though people left just yesterday. The walls still hold traces of smoke from their fires. The storage rooms still smell faintly of earth and grain. But there is no one there. No signs of struggle, no evidence of mass death, no clues to suggest where they went, just silence. This wasn't an isolated event. Across hundreds of miles from small farming hamlets to the grandest ceremonial centers, the same story repeats. Entire regions were deserted. The roads connecting villages fell into dust. The kivas, once filled with prayers, songs, and sacred rituals, became tombs of memory. Something powerful, something beyond ordinary hardship, had caused an entire civilization to move, to leave everything behind. So what could have happened? The land itself offers a few hints. Tree ring data shows that during the late 1200s, the Southwest was struck by a devastating and prolonged mega-drought, one of the worst in over 1,000 years. Rain stopped falling, crops failed, rivers dried to trickles. For a society that depended on agriculture, this would have been catastrophic. Families who had farmed the same fields for generations would have faced famine and despair. The land that once sustained them turned against them. But even drought alone doesn't tell the full story. The Anasazi were resilient. They had survived dry periods before by storing food, conserving water, and building networks of trade. Yet this time, something was different. Evidence suggests that as resources grew scarce, communities began to fracture. Archaeologists have found signs of burned structures, hastily built fortifications, and, most chillingly, human remains that show signs of violence. Neighbor turned against neighbor, village against village, as survival became desperate. There are traces of cannibalism in some sites, bones showing cut marks and evidence of cooking, suggesting acts of starvation-driven horror. Whether these were signs of ritual, vengeance, or sheer survival, no one can say for certain. But they paint a picture of a society under immense stress, collapsing from within. And then there is the mystery of the abandoned kivas. These underground chambers were the heart of Anasazi spirituality, sacred spaces used for ceremony, prayer, and community gathering. Yet many of them were sealed off intentionally before the people left. Fire pits were filled, entryways blocked, sacred objects left behind as if the people were closing a chapter or fleeing from something spiritual, something unseen. Some researchers believe there was a cultural or religious transformation, that the Anasazi didn't disappear, but migrated in search of new lands and new beliefs. Oral histories from the modern Pueblo tribes, the Hopi, Zuni, and others, tell of great migrations guided by spiritual visions. They speak of ancestors who left their homes when the world had become imbalanced, following sacred signs to find new beginnings. These stories suggest that the disappearance may not have been an end, but a rebirth. Still, not everyone agrees. Some archaeologists see evidence of a deeper mystery, a coordinated, mass movement that can't be fully explained by drought, war, or faith alone. The speed of the abandonment, the widespread scale, and the eerie uniformity of the ruins point to something larger, something that swept across the land and left no time for return. Could it have been disease? There are no mass graves to support that. Could it have been invasion? No traces of large-scale battles or foreign artifacts exist. Could it have been something in the skies, an astronomical event, a celestial omen that drove them to leave? Some point to the petroglyphs showing spirals, comets, and strange figures carved during the final years before they vanished. To the Anasazi, the heavens were sacred, and any disruption in the balance of the sky could have carried great spiritual meaning. Perhaps it was a combination of forces, a world unraveling piece by piece. The drought strained resources, internal conflicts grew, faith wavered, and finally the people made a choice to leave behind everything they knew, to walk away from their cities, their gods, their ancestors, and start anew somewhere unknown. When the last families left their cliff dwellings, they sealed the kivas behind them, locking away their spirits and their past. They may have believed they were preserving something or protecting others from what had gone wrong. They left their homes intact as if expecting to return, but they never did. Centuries later, their descendants, the Pueblo peoples, still tell stories of the journey of ancestors who migrated across the desert, guided by the voice of the earth itself. They say the old world ended because the people lost balance with nature, because they stopped listening to the signs. They left to restore harmony, to begin again. And somewhere in those stories between drought and faith, between war and migration, lies the truth of the Anasazi's sudden disappearance. A truth carved not just into stone, but into the memory of a people who refused to let their ancestors be forgotten. For over a century, scholars, scientists, and storytellers have tried to uncover the truth behind one of the greatest enigmas in North American history. What truly happened to the Anasazi? How could a civilization so advanced, so deeply rooted in its environment and faith, suddenly vanish? The ruins they left behind are silent, but the theories that try to explain their disappearance are as vast and complex as the desert itself. One of the most widely accepted explanations points to climate change, specifically the devastating droughts that struck the Southwest in the late 13th century. Tree ring studies show that rainfall nearly stopped for decades. Streams dried up, crops withered, and fertile soil turned to dust. For a people whose entire survival depended on agriculture, such a collapse in the ecosystem would have been catastrophic. The corn, beans, and squash that once sustained entire cities could no longer grow. The intricate irrigation systems they had built could no longer draw enough water. Families who had cultivated the same fields for generations faced starvation. But drought alone doesn't explain why they didn't simply rebuild or move nearby. The Anasazi had survived dry spells before. Archaeologists believe that this time it wasn't just the lack of rain, it was the breakdown of balance. Too many people, too little land, and a fragile environment pushed to its limit. As desperation grew, cooperation turned to competition. The society that once thrived on unity began to fracture from within. There is evidence that violence spread across the region. Burned villages, hastily built fortifications, and arrowheads embedded in walls tell a story of growing unrest. Archaeologists studying the site of Castle Rock Pueblo found chilling signs. Skeletons showing trauma, buildings set aflame, people who died defending their homes. What was once a thriving network of trade and communication became a landscape of isolation and fear. It's possible that rival clans or even neighboring tribes began fighting over the few remaining sources of water and fertile land. Others suggest internal rebellion, perhaps against religious leaders who had lost the trust of their people. In Anasazi culture, spiritual leaders were responsible for maintaining harmony between humans, nature, and the gods. If drought and famine persisted despite their prayers and ceremonies, faith in those leaders could have shattered. The collapse of belief can be just as destructive as the collapse of nature. Another theory dives into the realm of spiritual transformation. According to oral traditions of the modern Pueblo peoples, the Anasazi didn't vanish, they migrated. They left their homes behind intentionally, following sacred guidance toward a new beginning. Hopi legends tell of a time when the world became unbalanced, when people stopped respecting the harmony of life, and the spirits commanded them to move to a new land to restore order. In this view, the disappearance wasn't a tragedy, but a rebirth, a massive pilgrimage guided by faith rather than fear. Archaeological clues lend some support to this idea. Many sites show evidence that before leaving, the Anasazi performed closing rituals, sealing kivas, burning offerings, and leaving behind sacred artifacts as if saying farewell to their ancestors. They didn't abandon their world in chaos. They closed it with purpose. These final acts could represent a conscious spiritual departure, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Still, some researchers look to even more mysterious explanations. Among the petroglyphs left on canyon walls, there are strange images, swirling spirals, celestial bursts, and figures that some say resemble otherworldly beings. In Chaco Canyon, one carving appears to depict a massive star explosion, possibly the supernova of 1054 AD. Others show what look like comets, eclipses, and luminous shapes in the sky. Could the Anasazi have witnessed something so extraordinary that it reshaped their entire belief system? There are those who speculate about cosmic or extraterrestrial influences, a theory popular among enthusiasts of the unexplained. According to this line of thought, the Anasazi's deep fascination with the stars and their sudden departure could be connected. Their precise astronomical alignments, their worship of celestial cycles, and the strange symbols etched in rock might point to something beyond natural understanding. Perhaps they interpreted an astronomical event, a supernova, a solar phenomenon, or even contact with unknown forces as a divine message to leave. While these ideas may sound far-fetched to historians, they continue to capture the public's imagination because the truth remains hidden. Every explanation, drought, war, migration, faith, or cosmic intervention, fits part of the puzzle, but none explain it completely. Then there's the theory of societal exhaustion, the idea that the Anasazi civilization simply grew too big too fast. Their population expanded beyond what the land could support. The forests they used for building and firewood were depleted. The soil became overfarmed. The delicate balance they maintained with nature began to crumble. What started as prosperity slowly turned into pressure, and by the time disaster struck, the system could no longer sustain itself. Archaeologists studying pollen samples and soil layers have found that as the Anasazi expanded, they cut down trees faster than they could regrow. Deforestation led to erosion destroyed farmland, and soon the very land that had nurtured them began to fail. Environmental collapse, combined with social tension and drought, might have been the fatal combination that forced them to leave. Yet, even with all these possibilities, there is something almost poetic about their disappearance. They didn't leave written words, but perhaps they didn't need to. Their silence might itself be the message, a warning about imbalance, a lesson about harmony with nature, or a reminder that no civilization, no matter how great, is immune to the forces of change. Across centuries, as the wind moves through the ruins and the shadows crawl along the cliff walls, the Anasazi still seem to speak. Through the structures they built and the art they left behind, they hint that their story was not one of sudden death, but of transformation, a civilization that may have disappeared from sight but not from history. Centuries after the last Anasazi footsteps echoed through the canyons of the American Southwest, their spirit still lingers. In the wind that rushes through their stone homes, in the patterns of light that touch the ancient walls, and in the hearts of the people who claim them as ancestors. Though their cities have turned to ruins and their fires long gone cold, the Anasazi never truly vanished. Their legacy endures, carried through time in the traditions, stories, and beliefs of the modern Pueblo peoples, the Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, Taos, and others who still call this sacred land home. To the descendants of the Anasazi, the word disappearance is not accurate. They believe their ancestors did not vanish but moved on, guided by the spirits and the voice of the earth itself. For them, the great migration of their ancestors was not the end of a civilization, but a sacred journey, a passage into a new way of life. The ruins we see today are not monuments to loss, but markers of transition, proof that their people once lived in deep harmony with the world before being called to continue their spiritual path elsewhere. Even today, Pueblo elders tell stories that breathe life back into the stones. They speak of the ancient people who once lived among the cliffs and mesas, who listened to the voice of the earth and watched the stars for guidance. They tell of how the world became imbalanced, how greed, drought, and the breaking of sacred laws forced their ancestors to leave their grand cities and journey to new lands. These oral histories connect modern Pueblo communities directly to the Anasazi, preserving their wisdom and warning against the mistakes that may have led to their exodus. In these stories, the migration was an act of renewal. The people followed spiritual signs, the rising sun, the movement of birds, the patterns of clouds, until they reached new places where life could begin again. Some tribes trace their origins back to the very sites that archaeologists study today. For the Hopi, the ruins of Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon are not mysterious relics. They are the footprints of their ancestors. The architecture, art, and spiritual systems of the Anasazi live on through their descendants. The multi-story adobe pueblos of today's Southwest, like Acoma, Taos, and Zuni, echo the designs of their ancient cities. The circular kivas, still used for ceremony and prayer, are nearly identical to those carved into the cliff centuries ago. Pottery patterns, weaving styles, and even the songs sung during rituals trace their origins back to the ancient dwellers of the desert. The continuity of these traditions across centuries is proof that the Anasazi never truly disappeared. They transformed. But even with this living legacy, the mystery remains. Archaeologists continue to study the ruins, uncovering new clues about how these people lived, what they believed, and why they left. Every discovery opens a new door, and yet the deeper they look, the more complex the mystery becomes. The artifacts tell one story, the land tells another, and the oral traditions add yet another layer, one of faith, balance, and destiny. At sites like Chaco Canyon, researchers have found traces of an astonishing level of sophistication, astronomical knowledge, social organization, and engineering precision that rival some of the greatest ancient civilizations on Earth. How did a people living in such an unforgiving environment achieve this level of mastery? Their ability to plan, build, and align their cities with cosmic movements suggests a worldview deeply intertwined with the universe itself. Their understanding of life was not separate from nature or the stars, it was part of them. And that connection might be the key to understanding their enduring legacy. The Anasazi remind us of something humanity often forgets, that civilization is fragile, that harmony with nature is not a luxury but a necessity. The desert holds both the story of their triumph and the echo of their warning. The very forces that sustain them, the sun, the soil, the rain, may have also tested their endurance and forced their transformation. Today, as scientists examine the patterns of climate change, environmental strain, and social collapse, many draw parallels between the Anasazi and the modern world. The lessons left in their ruins feel eerily relevant, a reminder that when we lose balance with our environment, history has a way of repeating itself. The Anasazi may not have left written words, but their message is carved into the very bones of the earth. Visitors who walk through Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon often describe a feeling, an overwhelming sense of presence, as though the spirits of the old ones are still there, watching, guiding, whispering through the wind. The silence of those places is not empty. It hums with energy, with memory. The sandstone walls that once echoed with laughter and prayer now stand as a bridge between the past and the present. In every kiva that remains, in every pottery shard buried beneath the dust, the Anasazi left behind a story of human persistence, of creation, destruction, and renewal. Their civilization rose from the desert, flourished under the stars, and when the world changed, they adapted in ways we still don't fully understand. They left no written script, but they wrote their legacy in stone, in the alignment of the sun at solstice, in the sacred balance of their cities with the earth itself. Archaeologists continue to debate the exact reasons behind their departure, but the descendants who still honor them have no doubt their ancestors live on. Every ritual, every prayer, every dance performed in the Pueblos today is a thread connecting modern life to the ancient world. The Anasazi's spirit endures not as a vanished civilization, but as a living heartbeat in the culture, language, and traditions of their descendants. Their mystery continues to challenge us, to fascinate us, and to remind us that not all disappearances are endings. Some are transformations, quiet shifts from one way of being to another, guided by forces both earthly and divine. And somewhere out there, Across the canyons and deserts of the American Southwest, the whispers of the Anasazi still ride the wind, calling us to remember who they were and what they left behind. From the towering cliffs of Mesa Verde to the sacred corridors of Chaco Canyon, the story of the Anasazi is not just an ancient mystery, it is a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest questions. How do civilizations rise, thrive, and then vanish? What happens when people lose harmony with the land, with each other, and with the world that sustains them? For centuries, the Anasazi built a world of breathtaking ingenuity, cities carved from stone, calendars written in sunlight, and a spiritual connection that tied earth and sky together in perfect rhythm. Yet, just as quickly as their greatness rose, it was gone. The winds of time erased their footsteps, leaving behind only whispers in the ruins. In the desert, in the memory of those who still walk their path today. Archaeologists still search for answers: drought, famine, conflict, or cosmic change. But maybe the truth lies not in one event, but in the natural cycle of life itself. The Anasazi may not have disappeared at all. They may have simply moved on, following the same rhythms that guided them for generations, adapting to a changing world in ways we have yet to understand. Their descendants, the Hopi, Zuni, and Pueblo peoples, remind us that the story didn't end in those canyons. The traditions, art, and spirit of the Anasazi live on through them, pulsing like a heartbeat through the desert. What we call a disappearance, they call a transformation, an evolution from one chapter to the next. The Anasazi's silence speaks volumes. It teaches us that even the mightiest societies can fade, that balance with nature is fragile, and that wisdom is often carried not in words but in the stones, stars, and stories we leave behind. Their mystery endures because it is more than an archaeological puzzle. It is a timeless lesson about humanity itself. So, as the sun sets over the red cliffs of the Southwest, and shadows stretch across the ancient walls, one truth becomes clear. Civilizations may vanish, but their spirit never truly dies. The Anasazi's legacy still watches from the mesas, still whispers through the wind, reminding us that every mystery, no matter how deep, carries within it a spark of truth waiting for those who dare to listen.